had a lot of parents in tears over the last few weeks because they have been locked up. They've been so happy to be out.
It doesn't matter how much Donald Trump protests. If he loses the election come January 20th, he's done. He's gone.
I think Rick would be quite proud of me. I think he'd say, "Go on, lad."
It may have not been much screen time, but I walked through the Forest of Dean, bits of North Wales and half of Yorkshire.
All week we've been speaking to people across Greater Manchester about living under new coronavirus measures. In Wigan, I spoke with Bev Collier-Nelson, who runs a soft play centre, one of the many venues forced to close under the new Tier 3 restrictions. She says not only is she worried about her business, but about the families that go there.
We've done everything that's been asked of us. We had a huge list of guidelines that we had to put in place before we opened. We made sure that we covered every single one to make sure it's safe. And at the moment, I'm at a loss as to where we can turn because we've done everything that's been asked of us. We've got all our guidelines in place and parents and children seem happy. It's not just about running around. There's a lot of emotional well-being that goes on in the play centre, and I know we've had a lot of parents in tears over the last few weeks because they have been locked up. They've been so happy to be out. What do I say to them when they're getting in touch with me asking when can we reopen? It's just so sad.
And for you, when you saw that news come in that you would be going into these Tier 3 restrictions, how did it make you personally feel, seeing this business that you've built up and this kind of community that you've created?
Not wanting to get too upset at the end of the day. I am a mum of 3 children myself, and as much as this is a financial situation and we've got to keep a financial head on here, I have a lot of parents who I'm very, very close to now, and I just feel for them massively. I struggle when I'm at home, so I can understand. We've got new parents of babies that have been born in lockdown and we're the first place they've trusted to come, and now that rug's been pulled from under them as well. Where are they going to go? What are they going to turn to? They're keeping gyms open for adults' mental health. I think that play centres are, just as important for children and adults.
The main story on the programme for you today is what's been happening in Greater Manchester over the last few days. We heard from Andy Burnham just yesterday. He said he was still hopeful that there would be a deal with the government and that he was writing to the Prime Minister yesterday morning. And then he found out live on air while he was holding a news conference that actually the deal wasn't going to happen.
Well, obviously it was a great shame that we weren't able to reach agreement with Greater Manchester. We tried extremely hard. I had conversations, as did the Prime Minister's advisor, Sir Ed Lister, and the Prime Minister himself spoke to the Mayor, Andy Burnham, yesterday. But the public health situation in Greater Manchester was deteriorating. The evidence that we were receiving about the capacity of some of the hospitals in Greater Manchester, the number of cases, the fact it was rising up the age brackets to those people who were in greater danger of ill health.
The infection rate's gone down.
No, well, the number of cases is rising in some parts of Greater Manchester. It seems there's some evidence of it plateauing in the centre of Manchester, perhaps linked to universities. But the very clear public,
Salford as well.
The very clear public health advice.
Is it not?
Can I just finish answering the question?
No, but you're saying it's going up, and I'm saying blatantly it isn't because
I'm not sure what statistics you're actually looking at there, because the very clear public health advice that I received from the NHS, from NHS England and the Chief Medical Officer, was that this was a serious and deteriorating situation in Greater Manchester and that we needed to act.
OK, as I said, the figures for Manchester, the City of Manchester, have gone down. Something the Prime Minister didn't mention in his briefing yesterday was about gyms in Greater Manchester. Are they allowed to stay open or not?
I think that gyms are being asked to close, but you'll have to look on gov.uk when or we can revert to you when the regulations are published. But we've adopted the same model as Lancashire is having as the nearest neighbour of Greater Manchester. OK, interesting that we don't know the answer to that. Let's end where we started with Andy Burnham, should we? I mean, it's a win-win for him, really, isn't he? He's come across as a working-class hero, and all of those red wall constituencies that you won over at the last election are going to be looking at the Westminster elite and thinking,
he maybe will vote Labour at the next election?
Well, I'm not interested in showboating or indeed in personalities. I'm interested in public health. We discussed with leaders in Greater Manchester for 10 or 11 days how we could take action against a very serious public health crisis in the city region.
But by saying that, forgive me, Mr. Jerry, but by saying that, you're suggesting that he is not interested in the health of people in Greater Manchester. You asked me a question about whether this will lead to how people vote in a future election. As I say, that is not in my thoughts. What I want to do is take decisive action now to keep people safe. I also want to ensure that we protect their livelihoods by putting in place the right financial package. We will do that for Greater Manchester. People at home should know that regardless of personalities, we will provide the support that they deserve.
They were told to get off the streets. They were told to stay at home by the authorities. But the anger and frustration felt by many in Nigeria has spilled into the city of Lagos. It's been building over the course of the past 2 weeks. A protest against an unpopular police unit has turned into something else, a challenge to the government's ability to rule.
This is the most important moment in Nigeria's history. The most, by far, important moment of Nigeria's history. That's what we're witnessing right now. Because if nothing changes after this, if this doesn't work, then, it's over. It's over.
What do you mean by that? It's over.
I mean, look at what's going on now. The youth have come together, like something unexplainable, something that no one man could have possibly organized or led. Yeah, the youth of the largest black nation in the world came together and decided enough is enough. And this was triggered by police brutality, right? It's not like it was triggered by all the other things that it should have been triggered by all these years. Yeah, it was triggered by this police brutality that has been happening forever.
Were you surprised at what young people in Nigeria managed to do with those protests? Because you have been critical of the youth in Nigeria. You have said they deserve the leaders they get because they have been generally apathetic.
Yeah, and I take those words back now. They made me eat those words, didn't they? Because now, yeah, they've made something that I've only seen in my wildest dreams, yeah, a reality. I never thought that anything like this could ever happen. Not in my lifetime, not when I'm dead. Do you understand? But now I feel so blessed and privileged to witness this day and this age, this liberation generation, and to be part of it. I feel like it's the biggest achievement, it's the biggest thing in my life, I've ever seen in my life and I've ever been a part of.
It's Black Poetry Day, which honours past and present black poets. The day also commemorates the birth of the first published black poet in the United States. Jupiter Hammond was born in Long Island, New York on October the 17th, 1711.
I think any black poet that lends an authentic voice to the black experience is unbelievably important, from the Nikki Giovannis to the more modern poets like George the Poet, for example. I think in all of this, in the essence of balance, where perhaps one narrative of black people is more prevalent and sometimes detrimental to the perception of blackness, it's very important to tell the lived experience of black people, to illuminate black voices, to humanize black voices in a world where sometimes the notion of blackness is quite negative.
The Black Lives Matter has been such a memorable part of 2020, one of the really positive parts, I suppose you could say, that have come out of all of the difficulties of this year. How much extra energy and impetus do you think it has given to this year's Black Poetry Day?
Over the past few months, we've kind of seen a physical show of where we are as a society, of racism. So I think having these spaces and carving out time to celebrate, to understand, to look at the statistics, to look at the history, to study the stories, to study the people, to study the greats. I think carving out time to do that, especially in 2020, has become that much more important because it's right in our face now.
I suppose whatever your race, whatever your creed or colour, poetry is very often perceived, isn't it, as a sort of an elite form of literature. What got you into it? What whetted your appetite?
So I always make up answers to this when someone asks me because I can't completely remember. But I do remember really enjoying hip hop, and I loved the idea that you could tell an entire story and I could meet someone's mum, their dad, their relationship in perhaps 4 bars or 8 bars or 32 bars or a chorus. I love the fact that you could hear a line that would seem to speak directly to your heart and suddenly you felt seen, you felt less alone, you might have felt empowered or inspired. I've always just seen that as so powerful. So I think when I was 14, 15, with a lot less finesse and perhaps no charm to how I would perform, I just picked up a pen and I started trying to do that for myself and for other people. And it just didn't stop.
So for you, what are the themes then that come out in your poetry? What do you write about?
So my collection is called Somebody Give This Heart a Pen, and I think that generally is my focus. It's the idea that we all have our stories, whether it's a story on love, on loss, on puberty, on identity, on confidence, how we struggle with confidence, on race, on school, on whatever it might be. We all have these stories, and I think in telling these stories, in giving our heart a pen, we create an honest history, and in doing that we introduce empathy into each other as people. And I think at a time like now, especially 2020, what we need is more empathy, what we need is understanding, what we need is to be more forgiving as a society.
From 2009 to 2011, Michael Steele was the chair of the Republican National Committee running the National Party. He's always voted Republican, but not this time. This election, he's calling on voters to elect the Democratic nominee, Joe Biden. He spoke to Sky's Dermot Monaghan.
We should not be fighting over being Americans. We should not be fighting over who we are as citizens and what our responsibility to each other is, but more importantly, what is the responsibility of the president to the citizens of this country? So for me, it was character. It was a matter of understanding and appreciating someone like Joe Biden who shows his empathy, who cares about the well-being of his fellow Americans, does not mock them, does not make fun of them, doesn't disparage women, doesn't ignore the concerns of minorities. So those things outweigh the policy differences and the political dynamics. It's about the country, and it's about what it means to be an American.
But you know what this means? If you get your way, if you get your wish, the Republican Party is smashed. It has to rebuild from the ground up. But you think that's a price worth paying?
The Republican Party is smashed anyway. It was already damaged. I recognized that when I was national chairman. I had to contend with that emerging frustration known as the Tea Party, which over time changed and morphed and became, the Freedom Caucus inside the House, that took down 2 Republican House speakers, and now has emerged on the other side as this Trumpism, this sort of white populism, white nationalistic populism that is corrosive. So the party has a lot of cleaning out to do, and it has been long in trying to get that done. And I think now where we are, you're going to see that accelerated because the country's changing. The United States is no longer stuck in the 1950s and the 1960s. It is more dynamic, it is more diverse, and the party needs to speak to that. And you don't speak to minorities in the country when they say Black Lives Matter and your response is all lives matter. or you say with respect to white nationalism, well, they're fine people on both sides. So you have to understand where the country is and move into that space.
Well, let me ask you about the next few weeks, potentially, and put a scenario to you. President Trump loses narrowly, and we know the narrative he's been preparing already, that he's been cheated out of it, that he disputes some of the results in some of those key states. He refuses to concede. He refuses to leave the White House. Would you be amongst those senior Republicans who would go into the White House and say, sir, you have got to go for the sake of the Constitution, for the sake of American democracy?
At the end of the day, it doesn't matter how much Donald Trump protests. If he loses the election come January 20th, he's done. He's gone. President Biden will have the marshals and the Secret Service move him out if he refuses to leave. I doubt that will happen. If he doesn't want to cooperate with the transition, that's his prerogative. There's no statutory or constitutional requirement that he cooperates with the incoming administration. But at the end of the day, when the election is said and done and been certified and the Electoral College casts its votes, the president's term is over. A new president will assume the leadership of the country, and America will move forward and continue to build from there.
After months of delays due to the coronavirus crisis, Sky Cinema's adaptation of the classic novel, The Secret Garden, has just been released. The movie tells the story of a young girl sent to live with her uncle, who discovers a magical garden in his estate. I spoke to cast members Colin Firth and Dixie Edgerix to find out how they brought this enchanting tale to life.
And what if I were to tell you she discovered something magical? Something secret.
It looks absolutely idyllic, the sets. I mean, particularly for you, Dixie. Colin, you're stuck inside for the vast majority of the movie. But was it as nice as that, running around in the woods, or have I got a very naive view of filmmaking?
No, it was, I really loved it, you know, and obviously a lot of the time when you're filming, you're in a studio or, you know, just inside, which is all well and good. But I did just really love being outside, and we got to go to all these amazing British gardens. And yeah, I loved it. And I was kind of shocked because, you know, I had no idea that there was such diversity in the plants and stuff that we have in the UK, but we did. And yeah, I really loved it.
I'd just add to that, by the way, one of the quirks of filmmaking is all too often it looks as if you're in a beautiful place when in fact you're not. For me, it was sort of the reverse, because the only bit where I'm outside really is towards the end when I go off looking for Colin. And it may have not been much screen time, but I walked through the Forest of Dean, bits of North Wales and half of Yorkshire in order to complete that little walk. So I did get to see quite a lot of it, and it was gorgeous.
See, that is the magic of filmmaking. But so often we just hear of you being stuck on cold sets, so it's nice that you actually got to be properly outside all the time. That kind of being outside all the time, it feels quite old-fashioned now, doesn't it? You know, we're stuck in this sort of world of social media and screens and everything else. Do you think, Colin, that makes this film sort of even more escapism from the now, where we're even more in front of screens and things like that than we sort of normally would be?
If you'd asked me that question a year ago, I'd have said yes, certainly. But I think, you know, it's a bit too soon to judge the effect that COVID and lockdowns has been having on us all. But it does strike me, I certainly have seen this in people close to me, that those of us who've been stuck in front of screens have had enough of that, you know, because that's all we've had. And I think there's a real longing now to get out there, and whether it's to connect with nature or each other. I think maybe there's a bit of a waking up that says, you know, screens don't really do it. So perhaps it's going to have a different resonance now than it might have done a year ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, you reunite with Julie Walters in this. She said that perhaps she might not do another film unless it's Mamma Mia 3. Is that a project you'd like to, you'd be keen for as well?
We can always dream. The likelihood of that I can't comment on. You know, I suppose there are more songs, or why not just use them all again? But I'm sure that you won't find anybody that wouldn't be keen to show up for it.
I think we're all in the mood for a story that's going to lift our spirits. Well, 10-year-old Max Woozy could be about to do just that. He's been camping out in his garden for more than 200 days, and he's doing it to raise money for a local hospice. He's sleeping in a tent left to him by a neighbour who was looked after at the hospice in his final days. And it may be getting cold outside, but Max, who's raised around £75,000 so far, isn't planning to come back inside the house until he's spent a full year in his garden.
This all started because of our friends Rick and C, who unfortunately passed away. But Rick was an amazing man. He loved the outdoors, and the only time you saw him inside was when there was rugby on.
And he left Max tent. He wanted him to have it and made him promise to have an adventure in it.
So Rick said, have an adventure in my tent before he sadly died. You put the tent up in the garden, and were you intending to spend all this time in it, or was it just going to be 1 or 2 nights?
It was I did I think about 10 nights and said I want to do 50. Then I could say to my friends, look, I've done 50 nights. I've done an amazing thing. And then I wanted to go to 100. Then I wanted to go to 200. Now I want to do a year.
You've raised a huge amount of money. Just tell me what the total is at the moment.
Including gift aid, it's something around like £96,000, including gift aid.
£96,000. Well, Stephen, who is the chief executive of the hospice, I mean, that's going to go a long way, isn't it, that sort of money?
A huge way. For us, Max is an absolute beacon of support for our care, and in real terms, that will cover 2 nurses for an entire year. So Max is genuinely making a huge impact on people's lives just when they need our care.
Max, what do you think Rick would say about all of this? He said, have an adventure. You're certainly having one.
I think Rick would be quite proud of me. I think he'd say, go on, lad. I think if he was still alive now, I think he'd be over there in the tent next to me.